just kind of transition here a little bit. So we have that, here's where we're going. We're going to Hawaii. We have to be able to understand what the weather is going to be. So we have to pack the right thing. We have to get the plane tickets, all that kind of thing, maybe. But then do we have to measure whether or not we hit those points, right? So how do we measure it? Do we just kind of teach them a bunch of stuff and then hope they got it? Or how does this assessment stuff play into this whole backward design idea? This is going to be the awkward moment. I'm just going to let it float out there and be very organic. And
Jen gets to tackle this one first, because she already introduced it a little bit, because your assessments should measure your objectives. And she used that phrase a couple times when talking about breaking up her class. So Jen, how do you use formal and informal assessment to measure those objectives and goals and lead to the outcomes?
Well, and I'll start by saying, when you start with backwards design, not only do you want to know what you want your student to look like, and hopefully have some new ideas and applications, you also need to think about how you're going to assess the priorities you've created before you teach them. You can't be creating assessments on the fly. You've got to be ready to know which pieces, which priorities are going to be formative, which means I'm going to have this informal stance of checking in. Are they getting it? Are they making progress towards my goal? Versus my summatives that say this is the end product. And this is really going to show me if they got to that analysis and the synthesis part of the course. So I look back and I go, okay, so I've got these modules and they're related to the goals and the outcomes. And every time I walk in and I have these objectives for the day, a formative assessment for one day might look like a 30-second to a minute kind of revamp at the end of class. What did we learn today? What are you taking away as you walk out the door? That's a really easy formative assessment that tells me if students understood what we talked about. Tell your partner, and then let's share out. I do a lot of that. Let's talk to two people around you. Tell them what you learned today, and then we come back. Another short ways to ask a quick question. I could go into 1,500 strategies on how to do formatives, because they're all about the check-in. A formative is something that tells me we're on the road to the goal. I'm on the plane, maybe. It's just how far along in the journey we are. The formatives inform my teaching. They tell me if I need to back up, if I need to slow down, if I need to move quicker. What I don't want to do is feel like every one of those formative assessments becomes a massive grade book issue, because then I'm losing the purpose of a formative. A formative should not directly impact a student's grade. It should be a checkpoint. And if I want to assign a certain amount of points to a checkpoint, that's okay, but not every formative is that. I need to have enough little ones to get to a bigger one. So I have all these little formatives along the way, all these little daily check-ins online, face-to-face, and then I get to a bigger formative that might look like an assignment. That assignment tells me if they've made the progress. Those assignments build to a summative. And that summative can look in any way I want. Pencil, paper, YouTube video. I get to decide that, and I should have that decided long before I ever get there. But the daily formatives inform a formative piece that I'm going to grade. And so that's kind of the model I use to work into how do I know that I'm on the right track, because my student data tells me I'm on the right track through these little check-ins. Then I get a formative assignment that says, yep, they got that. So now we're ready for the next leg of the journey. And those formatives guide the journey. And then the summative is the actual getting off the plane and hitting the beach with my 100 SPF.
Well, that sounds really hard. And I say a little tongue in cheek, but also, wow, if I'm teaching Greek, like, would a vocab quiz be a formative type thing? Like, do they know these words? Let's just check in. They all do. All right, let's move on. None of them do. We have to go back.
Yeah, if that's a priority that they know those words, you do need to check in on it. You do need to make sure you're meeting the goals and the outcomes by doing these check-ins. I sometimes it's just, we do exit slips. Exit slips are, we ask a question or two, they turn them in at the end. It's just an idea of like, here's 2 big questions we have about the content we've been giving you, and I read through those and I know if they're getting it or not. Mm-hmm. And that guides my instruction to know, again. So if vocab is a priority, then yeah, you need to check in, and you need to know how to support them if they're not getting it, and you need to know how to move forward if you are. But I kind of threw a whole bunch in there of the little ones that moved to the big ones. Sorry, so I had the little. I took you on the whole train, and
that was good.
So we might need to digest that a little bit.
If you get to get back to the question, the purpose of assessment is to provide you, the teacher, with data, hopefully meaningful, of whether or not students are fill in the blank. If it could be meeting the outcomes. If we're talking about a final exam or the end of the semester, a massive project, I'm getting meaningful data of whether or not students hit the outcome. If it's maybe more of a segment goal, like a unit test or a book review or whatever the other assignments are, you're getting meaningful data of whether or not students have met that goal in a bigger chunk. And what Jen was referring to there was some of the small things. I need to measure my daily objectives, even if it's not going to go into the grade book. I need to have a sense of, this is what I was heading into this specific class period as. This was the target, this was the objective, and did students meet it? If I just teach all the way until the bell rings and I don't give a chance for a student response or a check-in, and all the students walk out the door and I haven't had some sort of follow-up or ask them to give me some sense of what they learned, I have no idea where to start the next class, because I don't know what sunk in. I don't know if they learned it, if they want me to go faster or slower. I'm flying blind as I walk into the next class. And so to get back to the question, the purpose of assessment is to give you meaningful data that informs you what you need to teach next.
Yeah.
So, but I think the reason a lot of us do it is our assessment is, did I teach something? Yes, I spent 50 minutes talking, check that off and you move on. And we haven't really, kind of like Jen saying, some sort of check-in, like what is a question that you have? Like I've done that sometimes. And a lot of times the students are asking, I don't understand what that had to do with this thing. And I see that 15 times, like, oh man, I need to go back next time and cover that. But the problem is that takes us off our rhythm, right? It's like, no, I've got a schedule. I've got to cover all this stuff in the next 2 weeks, and we don't have time for the students not to understand it. So if they don't, that's too bad for them, right?
Kent, when we think about the online connection to this is where our interaction with our students in forums helps us, because it's there we're gauging how well are they grasping the concepts, how well are they taking the material that we've been talking about and using it and interacting with it with other students and comments. This is a form of assessment as we begin to go through and review their forum post. Mm-hmm. So Sam, you saw the voice thread taxonomy that I sent you. I thought that was a good example of ways to look at forum posts. Are they just rehearsing material, or are they interacting with it? You know, so there's a whole series of levels, and that gives us an idea where our students are before we move on.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Assessment should measure what students learn, not what has been taught. And that's a mind shift, I think, with how we approach assessment. It's something I learned very early in my teaching career. Assessment should measure what students have learned, not be a measure of what has been taught, because those are two very different things.
Yes.
Yeah.
I I would add in just a little bit more of a nuance here, that I think an important part of our assessment is, like Jen was talking about, the formative aspects to that we don't necessarily do that on our own. Sometimes I think we shoulder that as faculty and we say, well, that's my responsibility, is to make sure that all the students are learning. No, I think one of the strongest forms, especially in higher education, is peer-to-peer assessment. So we can provide opportunities, whatever they be, in small groups or in pair shares or whatever, that students give feedback to one another. Man, that's a huge lesson to us, or that they're getting it. So that's a strong piece, is providing opportunities for peer assessment as they go along. I know some of our faculty here at Corban, I've listened to some of their strategies, the way that they're doing it, and I'm like, okay, I need to do that, because the students, their peer evaluation, and guess what? For the faculty member, less grading, less time that they have to spend with that, and they're getting better quality work as an end result. I'm like going, well, that's a no-brainer. So yeah, but that's a key, I think, in the assessment. We feel that, yes, we set up the structure for it and the framework for it, but we can also have students speak into that as we go along, especially in those formative aspects, like Jen was saying, in providing us some quality feedback and data, like Aaron was saying, to the types of assessment goals that we're actually trying to achieve.
Seems like this takes a lot of improvising, that seems like one of the most important things, because you have this plan for 15 weeks, but if something happens, you have to be able to improvise, right? You have to be able to, well, I need to attack this in a different way. Like me saying that didn't help. Maybe I can find a video that explains it. Okay. And then you send that out to them. So this is I mentioned that a little bit tongue in cheek, but it's a lot of work, but it really is the idea, because you have to be totally engaged, right? Like not only are students engaged, but the professors have to be engaged by realizing, oh, they're getting it. They got that, or man, I need to figure out a different strategy for this, right?
It is hard work, but you rely on your planning, again, your course outcomes. You get to make those decisions in the moment of, they didn't get this, and this is really essential to the course outcome at the end, so I do need to spend the time to reteach it. Or maybe it's they're kind of off on this little peripheral thing, but it isn't essential to the course outcome, so I'm not going to reteach it. I'm going to give them, we're going to start next class with just a turn and talk, or they're going to talk in small groups just to kind of reiterate, and maybe they can come to grasp working with it, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. And so you make these decisions all the time about the feedback that you're collecting from the assessment, but you have to be rooted in the course outcomes as you prioritize where you're going to spend your time and your energy. And even as you design what's going to go in the gradebook, and your bigger assessments need to be focused on what are the essential outcomes of your whole course. So again, there's alignment. We don't want to be measuring or putting things in the gradebook that are trivial aspects in light of that backwards mapping of the bigger things. Again, less is more. I want to make sure that my students are hitting the outcomes. I'm going to assess that in 3 big things through the semester, not 17 little things. We're going to do 17 little things, but I maybe not grade them, because they're going to be peer assessed or even self-assessed. And again, the variety, you're going to weave all of these things together through the semester.
I think a better word than improvise too is flexibility. Teaching is about flexibility. It's about being able to bend with a curve that comes at you, like, oh, I need to have students, they need 10 minutes tomorrow to talk in groups, because those who were slightly confused, hopefully in this peer talk time, are gonna find what was missing. It's gonna come together for them. So I don't want to improvise and pull out the duct tape. I want to be flexible and say, I can bend to this, and I can give a little bit of time here, because I know it's going to be better served for my students when I get to here. So there is nothing straight except your alignment process. I'm going to say this. There's nothing straight except your outcomes, your goals, and your objectives. Everything else in education and in teaching is about flexibility and being able to meet the needs of the student. I've never taught a truly perfect lesson, and I don't know that I'll ever feel that there is such a thing. And we teach our students about flexibility, and that's really the mindset you have to have. You have to be willing to stop, assess, and then take those few minutes or figure it out, but not feel like you have to break something and then put it back together. You just got to bend a little, because there's if you felt like you had to break everything that went wrong and redo it, that gets heavy, and that becomes cumbersome, and that's when we go back to some of our old habits because they're comfortable. It's about being flexible and knowing you don't have to reinvent every time something doesn't go to plan.
That's good.
Kent, I think of it this way. The analogy that works for me is when I'm content driven, I'm driven by guardrails. And so I stay on track forward. And when I'm thinking about my key outcomes and goals, they serve as a GPS setting for me. And so I'm constantly adjusting and checking on my progress towards that goal instead of just trying to stay within these set of guardrails as we pile down the highway.
I like that.
These are good. Yes, these are good analogies. I love that. Yeah, because as we get so sucked into, did I perform well? Did I do this? And I think what Aaron said, I mean, that's the whole thing. Just because I think I taught does not mean the students learned. And just completely going back to that constantly of saying, this is about them. This is about the learners. And I can figure out a bunch of different ways to do this. But at the end of the day, that's all that really matters, is that they learn something. Right. Yeah.
And I think too, the quality of what, to kind of push the analogy on the Hawaii vacation trip is that, when we impart final grades, we say, okay, the student who has a nice tan, who used the proper amount of SPF, then they're going to get the A. The student who's totally sunburned, then they didn't learn anything. We tried to help them through the whole thing. It's just hurting, and it's so, you're trying to provide that. So not everybody's going to, everybody may get to the goal, but it's when they get there, what have they ultimately learned, I think, is another question to ask.
I'm going to flunk every class based on that. I will never get an A in your class, Sam, and I don't know what to do about it.
Oh, that's so good. Yeah. Yeah.
You go to tanning booths before you went on the trip, so you went. Understand, and that's just
a challenge. It's not going to work.